Welcome to Matters Financial, Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. It's appreciated. I wrote about the Eurobond over the weekend. I said Kenya has been planning its first sovereign 10-year dollar-denominated Eurobond since last year, and proceeds from this sale had been factored into the 2013-2014 budget. The urgency around the payments of shillings 1.4 billion to Anglo Leasing, which were made after authorization by President Kenyatta, was surely because the President and his team could see a road crash in the local markets if those markets were called upon to make good the shortfall in the event of a skipped Eurobond. The roadshow will take 4 or 5 days, so we could go to the markets this month. This is the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury, Henry Rotich, speaking to Bloomberg from Kigali last week. It's always difficult to unpick cause and effect, and the insecurity has been undercutting our asset prices. But you will have noted the shilling closed at a 2.5-year low on May 20th. And printed a trade above 88 against the dollar last week and yesterday. However, this time of year is a period of secular weakness for the shilling as full-year dividends are upstreamed to parent companies. On balance, and subject to security issues staying on the trend line, which is obviously considerably elevated this year, then the shilling should improve from here. The FTSE NSE 25 index, which had been on a hot streak in April, posted its worst losing streak in 2014 through last week. You do not have to be a rocket scientist to work out that the blowback on Kenyan assets from a Eurobond miss at this time would have been severe. Whilst I admire the bravura calls about how we're going to ship in 1 million Chinese tourists, I can assure you that if the asset markets, which are hard-nosed, were treated to that kind of baloney, the shilling would be going the way of the Ghana cedi, where policymakers have been peddling a narrative no one believes in, and each time the narrative gets peddled, the cedi sinks further. With regard to policymaking and policy utterances, I think selling the Eurobond will have an enormously beneficial impact. We often cite sovereignty as a catch-all phrase, and it is worth pointing out that we are ceding a great deal of sovereignty by selling this Eurobond. Essentially, international investors and our bondholders will now have the capacity to price our credit on a real-time basis. The cause and effect will be seen on a continuous real-time basis. I believe this will over time kick some of the more outlier behavior into touch. The issue of our Eurobond will be not less than $1.5 billion, and I would err towards trying to sell as much as $2 billion. The redemption of a syndicated loan of $600 million was kicked 3 months down the road, but evidently Eurobond proceeds will have to deduct that $600 million. A $1.5 billion issue will mean $0.9 billion of net new money. I incline to the view that we need a $2 billion issue and $1.4 billion of net new money. In the event we unload $2 billion of bonds, then I too can foresee the scenario the Permanent Secretary Kamal Thuge outlined in the Business Daily. When the Eurobond goes through, hard currency worth billions of shillings will have a strengthening impact on the shilling and pull down interest rates. That is the kind of scenario our next fiscal year is based on, he said. Then I said, let me finish by trying to answer the $64,000 question, which is what price are we going to have to pay for this money? In order to answer this, we have to take a look at other sub-Saharan African issuers and those whose bonds have a proximate maturity to our proposed issue. And I looked, in fact, it was edited out, at Gabon, Rwanda, and Kenya. Gabon, Rwanda, Kenya, and Ghana. And I essentially think that Kenya will be satisfied if it can sell at a yield of 6.5% in the event of a $1.5 billion issue, and closer to 7% if it goes for a big issue of $2 billion. If you haven't had a chance to look at Munir's Mindspeak session, please do. It's uploaded on YouTube, and really was very engaging. And I liked his point that, his moral compass is driven by meritocracy and justice. As I've said before, I'm looking forward to flying to Maputo from tomorrow for the government of Mozambique and IMF conference. That's on May 29th and May 30th. The last time I was in Maputo was in June 2012, and then thoroughly enjoyed some very flavoursome tiger prawns, for which it is very famous. It's very retro, beautiful architecture. And of course, as I've said before, I think because of the gas find, it's essentially the latest Qatar. I'll put up a photograph of the sunrise from the bedrooms of the Palana. I'm sorry not to be staying there this time, staying at the Radisson. I'll put up another photograph I took of Maputo, the sunset, as we were coming back from an island on a boat, and another photograph of the Cathedral Praca de Independencia in Maputo. And if you haven't had a chance to see the Christine Lagarde Mindspeak session, then please take a look. It really was tremendous. Home thoughts: I took delivery of 5 Don Delillo and 5 Thomas Pynchon books Sunday, and read the book that Martin Amis reviewed in the New Yorker. And I'm going to go to this review which Martin Amis has done. He calls Don Delillo the prophetic soul, the laureate of terror, saying Don Delillo is the laureate of terror, modern or postmodern terror, and the way it hovers and shimmers in our subliminal minds. As Eric Hobsbawm has said, terrorism is a new kind of urban pollution, and the pollutant is an insidious and chronic disquiet. Such is the air Delillo breathes, and so strong is this identification that we feel slightly dislocated when in The Ivory Acrobat he confronts a form of terror that is natural and therefore ancient and innocent. And saying, now that terror has become local, how do we live? And I was reading this book, The Angel Esmeralda, first published in 1994. What is terror now? Some noise on the pavement very near, a thief with a paring knife, or the stammer of casual rounds from a passing car. And then going back to the book that I'm currently reading, Human Moments in World War III, is a short story. A mission specialist and his young sidekick Volmer are up in Tomahawk 2, orbiting the Earth and gathering intelligence, tricked out with their suction clogs, modal keys, sense frequencies, and quantum burns. The specialist is monitoring data on his mission console when a voice breaks in, a voice that carried with it a strange and unspecifiable poignancy. He checks in with his flight dynamics and conceptual paradigm officers at Colorado Command, and we ask ourselves, has there ever been a more distinctive exponent of dialogue than Don Delillo? We have a deviate Tomahawk. We copy. There's a voice. We have gross oscillation here. There's some interference. I've gone redundant, but I'm not sure it's helping. We are clearing an outframe to locate source. Thank you, Colorado. It is probably just selective noise. You are negative red on the step function quad. It was a voice, I told them. We have just received an affirm on selective noise. We will correct Tomahawk. In the meantime, advise you to stay redundant. The voice, in contrast to Colorado's metallic pidgin, is a melange of repartee, laughter, and song, with a quality of purest, sweetest sadness. Somehow we are picking up signals from radio programs of 40, 50, 60 years ago. Meanwhile, there is the blue planet tenderly rendered with its sediment plumes and kelp beds. It really is he is a fantastic writer, a kind of prophet seer. I discovered a long while ago, and that's only rediscovered. And I thoroughly enjoyed it, and that's a fantastic review. I'm going to back by Martin Amis. Political reflections. I got this photograph of a Ukrainian helicopter, Mi-24 gunship, firing its cannons against rebels at the main terminal building of Donetsk International Airport, May 26th. And clearly that, the president there is seeking a military victory. A Vietnamese fishing vessel capsized in disputed waters in the South China Sea on Monday after harassing and colliding with a Chinese fishing boat, the Xinhua news agency said on Tuesday. The Vietnamese said it was rammed by a Chinese boat, ministry spokesman Lei Bin said by phone at the Vietnamese vessel. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said he hoped to boost maritime aid to Vietnam. I think China's beating up on Vietnam because it can. And, pour encourager les autres. Abe Shinzo's strategy, rearrange region's power balance, laid out an assertive foreign policy agenda saying he hoped to accelerate maritime aid to Vietnam and its territorial standoff with China and host Vladimir Putin this year, despite the Russian president's isolation from the West. Beijing's unilateral drilling activities for oil in waters claimed also by Hanoi have led to heightening of tensions, Mr. Abe told the Wall Street Journal in an interview Friday. We will never tolerate the change of status quo by force or coercion, he added. As part of his broader strategy to rearrange the region's power balance, Mr. Abe also signaled a desire to keep alive his diplomatic overtures to Russia. He condemned Russia's annexation of portions of Ukraine and noted that Japan has imposed sanctions in coordination with the US and Europe, but he made clear that he also hoped to maintain the dialogue he has intensified through 5 summit meetings with Mr. Putin, more than Mr. Abe has had with any other head of state. Saying regarding the visit to Japan by President Putin, I agreed with the President that we should carry it out in autumn of this year. Mr. Putin was less welcoming to Japan. Well, clearly he would be, because now he's all in with China. However, telling foreign journalists Saturday that Tokyo's sanctions against Russia surprised him and left him unsure whether Japan was ready for talks. So Mr. Abe is clearly seeking to carve out a more forward position, as we've spoken about before. He's very much the Pivot to Asia's attack dog. And I think he's trying to, disavow people of the notion that the pivot's been defanged. And I wrote about that on the 2nd of December when I said the Pivot to Asia bears its fangs when the Americans flew 2 B-52s through the ADIZ. One of the key elements I wrote then of the Pivot to Asia is the air-sea battle concept. This concept envisages the battle beginning with a blinding attack against Chinese anti-access facilities and incorporates distant blockade operations. China's dependence on foreign oil is increasing just as the US's dependency is decreasing. And I was then coming back to East Africa and given my belief that the eastern seaboard is a fabulous energy prize that puts the Indian Ocean in many respects right into the geopolitical frame. If you're considering distant blockade operations, one of those areas you will be blockading is this part of the world, given the amount of energy that is likely to be sold into Asia in the future. Of course, Ai Weiwei's snake, for me, best symbolizes the policy of containment, which I think was the strategy behind the Pivot to Asia. But the gas line, which I think goes through Xinjiang, so it's entirely compromised anyway, was, I suppose, an attempt by the Chinese to break out of that encirclement. History is made. All invited foreign leaders with Indian leaders at the swearing-in ceremony of the Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Twit pic that I found. It was on April the 9th, 1998, when then South Africa Deputy President Thabo Mbeki, in his address to the United Nations University in Tokyo, spoke of the African Renaissance. One of our answers to this question is that as Africans, we recall the fact that as the European Renaissance burst into history in the 15th and 16th centuries, there was a royal court in the African city of Timbuktu, which in the same centuries was as learned as its European counterparts. What this tells me is that my people are not a peculiar species of humanity. I say this here today because it is true, but also because I know that you, the citizens of this ancient land, will understand its true significance. And as we speak of an African Renaissance, we project into both the past and the future. I speak here of a glorious past of the emergence of Homo sapiens on the African continent, Mr. Mbeki said. Interesting that April 1998, so 16 years ago, put up a photograph of Thabo Mbeki. The Islamic Republic's oil minister said over the weekend, as a country capable of supplying gas in very big volumes, Iran is always willing to be present in Europe's markets, either through pipeline or in LNG form. So clearly Iran seeing this standoff with Russia as an opportunity. A fellow called Ian Cox came in my office yesterday, and Maria Springer was the interlocutor of that meeting, and a very interesting chap, and he put me on to a video which I'd seen in part by a group called Vice, Saving South Sudan. It really is a compelling documentary. A historical tweet, American soldiers landing on Omaha Beach, Normandy, 1944, by Robert Capa, very famous photograph. And then I can't read what this tweet said, but I like the photograph from Pravda. International markets, currency markets, the euro 136.56, so ticked back up a little bit. Dollar index 80.24, down a little bit. Japanese yen 101.96, Swiss franc 0.8946, pound 168.58, Aussie 0.9260, India rupee 59.032, and declined a little bit from areas around 58.50, and talk was that there was intervention. Touched 58.335 on May 23rd. South Korean won 10.2355, Brazilian real 2.2240, Egyptian pound 7.1456, so still on the slide, and the South African rand 10.3420. The euro has fallen 1.5% this month, but it's having a little short covering rally today. Yen has gained 0.3%, Aussie down 0.3%, and the Kiwi has lost 0.7%. Mario Draghi yesterday said the key issue, however, is timing. What we need to be particularly watchful for the moment is, in my view, the potential for a negative spiral to take hold between low inflation, falling inflation expectations, and credit, in particular in stressed countries. The key issue today, however, is timing. There is fertile ground for a pernicious negative spiral, which then also affects expectations, he said. Term funding of loans, be it on balance sheet, that is through refinancing operations, or off balance sheet, that is through purchases of asset-backed securities, could help reduce any drag on the recovery coming from temporary credit supply constraints. Inflation in the 18-nation euro area has been below 1% since October, less than half the ECB's goal, and economies from Italy to the Netherlands contracted in the first quarter. Unemployment was 11.8% in March, near the record 12% reached last year. Euro dollar, I'll put up a 3-month chart. It touched 136.15, the weakest since February 13, and below its 200-day moving average of 136.39. It's now back above that. Dollar index 80.24, nearer the top of the range, but I think remains capped. Dollar yen 101.96. Kuroda will speak in Tokyo at a conference hosted by the BOJ. Gold, I'm going to put up a 1-year chart, trading very soft, 1290.36 last. Crude oil, I'm going to put up a 1-year chart, 104.39, and combing through the internet, it seems clear that China has been a very big buyer of late, and I think I missed that. The contract climbed 61 cents to 104.35. This is yesterday, highest close since April 21st. This is what I found interesting. The volume of all futures traded was 3 times the 100 days moving average, and that was on a day when the markets were closed. So very interesting. Roberto Cavalli has approached Investcorp for a possible investment, and I'll put up the photograph of him posing before the start of his Spring-Summer 2014 collection during Milan Fashion Week. The Sensex turned lower today, but it has risen 10% in May. its best monthly gain since January 2012. The MICEX advanced 1% to the highest level since February 28th. And I remember talking when it was down, that it was a great buy. Coming to Africa, we envisage that the vote audit may take us not more than 2 months to conclude. This is Chimkweta Phiri from Malawi's Electoral Commission. I saw this tweet: Ghana, Kenya, Zambia, Mozambique, Tanzania, Uganda are the new hotspots for foreign direct investments in Africa. And then the Wall Street Journal, foreign investment in Africa seen at a record 80 billion in 2014. It was a pleasure meeting the author of that particular article. But what's interesting is the US, UK and France still lead the foray into Africa. The 3 countries combined held the biggest share of African investments in 2012, totaling 178.2 billion. BRICS collectively held investments valued at 67.7 billion. 27.7 billion were Chinese. A very interesting article talking about the complexion of FDI growth, what's happening. Zimbabwe heads for recession as factory shutdown spurs deflation. This is a Bloomberg report, but we've seen this coming for a while now. 5 years after Zimbabwe emerged from recession, ended hyperinflation by banning the local currency and spurred farming production, the economy is at risk of contracting again. Foreign currency needed to pay wages and buy imports has dried up. Mugabe's government has given investors mixed signals on plans to seize company stakes as part of an indigenization policy. There's massive rollback in the linguistics of all that. Factories are operating at just under 40% capacity, and not painting a very positive picture. The New York Times is carrying a report about how US trains African commanders to fight terrorism. United States Special Operations troops are forming elite counterterrorism units in 4 countries in North and West Africa that American officials say are pivotal in the widening war against Al-Qaeda's affiliates and associates on the continent, even as they acknowledge the difficulties of working with weak allies. A secretive program financed in part with millions of dollars in classified Pentagon spending and carried out by trainers including members of the Army's Green Berets and Delta Force, was begun last year to instruct and equip hundreds of hand-picked commanders in Libya, Niger, Mauritania and Mali. It's an in-depth report, but we've largely known about this, that AFRICOM has been scaling up in an under-the-radar manner. And then, of course, Bring Back Our Girls was a unique opportunity to insert them into the picture. South African All Share is up 9.71% this year and above 50,000 for the first time. And it's performed extremely strongly this year. Dollar versus Rand 10.34.22, I think goes to 10, as I said before 11. The Egyptian pound, which slid through 7 not too long ago, it's at 7.14.82. The Egyptian stock market, Africa's best in 2014, is up 30.66% this year. I said in January that if the equity markets had a vote in Egypt, Al-Sisi would actually get one of those impossible to believe votes of 99.8%. I'll put up a photograph of him, and he is indeed proven wily and subtle and fair, because he put away Mubarak as well for a number of years. I think that sort of established his bona fides. Nigeria All Shares down 0.6% this year, but has rallied 1,160 points over the last 4 weeks, which is a signifier when you set it against the news flow. Nigeria says they know where missing girls are. Militaries located nearly 300 schoolgirls abducted by Boko Haram 6 weeks ago, but fears using force trying to free them could get them killed, the country's chief of defense said. He says, we can't go and kill our girls in the name of trying to get them back. But, my conclusions are the detachment of the president from this situation for 3 whole weeks before he uttered a single word was really breathtaking. There's a link for this from Reuters, 35-second link I put up on Rich Rabbits, where you can hear the spokesman say, we want our girls back, I can tell you we can do it, our military can do it, but where they are held, can we go with force? The Ghana Stock Exchange is up 5.32% this year. Interesting article in NG Africa, Through the Looking Glass, Counter-Terrorism and the Securitization of Africa's Politics, saying that in 2002 the National Security Strategy states, the events of September 11 taught us that weak states can pose as great a danger to our national interests as strong states. The central plank of this new security policy is counter-terrorism funding and training of African militaries. As a result, counter-terrorism funding has skyrocketed, as has the United States' military footprint in Africa under the guise of the United States Africa Command. Moreover, domestically smart African leaders have cleverly exploited this new securitized environment to shrink political space and criminalize dissent by labeling their political opponents as terrorists. These African leaders are adept at exploiting the mixed signals emanating from the United States government that the State Department will come round and issue fluffy rhetoric about democracy, good governance and respect for human rights, but provide little money, while the Department of Defense hardly says anything in public but gives out plenty of money, saying there are few accountability mechanisms in counter-terrorism funding as well, talking of the Pakistanization of Kenya. In the war against the Taliban, Pakistan was the center of gravity as much as Afghanistan, providing a safe haven from where Al-Qaeda and the Taliban operated. In the war on terror in the Horn of Africa, targeting Al-Shabaab in Somalia, Kenya has become the new Pakistan and provides Western intelligence with the infrastructure and base from where to wage the war. Unlike in Pakistan, there is marginal political cost to the political elite in Kenya for backing the Western-led operations, not yet at least. However, this uncritical embrace of the counter-terrorism project, coupled with sending the Kenya Defence Forces into Somalia in October 2011, has exposed the country's domestic security underbelly. Good point. Its inability to police and provide adequate security domestically. The systemic and structural problems with the security machinery mean it lacks finesse in operating in the new and ever-shifting security ecosystem. Further, the intervention has revealed that Kenya cannot police its border adequately. The consequences of intervention in Somalia are an increasing blowback of insecurity in Nairobi and the northeastern and coast counties, particularly a series of grenade attacks. It's not clear those are Al-Shabaab. There is a strong school of thought that those are false flag operations against government targets, public meeting places and churches. The highlight of the security blowback post-Somalia intervention was the September 2013 attack on Westgate shopping mall, popular with Western expatriates, saying Museveni is very clever at appropriating the terrorism discourse he is, and of course Ethiopia as well. I concluded by saying the US via US Africa Command holds a decisive hard power lever with which to tilt the African pitch. With the parabolic shift in asymmetric type risks, see Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram, we are now learning that scandals like Anglo leasing, which were transacted in the murky area of national security, has resulted in a hopeless situation where security agencies have now fallen so far behind the curve they are off the charts. This chasm is not going to be narrowed anytime soon. I also believe that US Africa Command will increasingly be seen as an instrument that can staunch the Chinese advance on the continent. And then talking about his point about social media, Africans have become increasingly vocal, and the political class will eventually need a more sophisticated call and response and ultimately democratic reaction to social media, I think. In particular, for example, the Cabinet Secretary for Internal Security, of which people have zero faith because, he friended stuff aside Olelenko at the time of Westgate, and it keeps doing it. But you see, nothing has been done about it. Not a single official has been fired, so you can see what I'm talking about there. A man and a woman who blew themselves up in a restaurant in Djibouti on Saturday. This was the first attack of its kind in the East African state, were probably Somalis, the Interior Minister said. Ethiopia pushes retail door ajar to foreigners, well, a tiny little bit. An interesting report well worth reading, and talking about the fact that they're not inviting the supermarkets in, they're inviting them to come in and manage a retailer that the government is creating. But it has become the holy grail for investors in multinationals. Kingdom of Swaziland only has around $790,000 left in the bank, according to Al Jazeera. The World Bank will offer $1 billion in financing to help Angola rebuild infrastructure and develop its agriculture, an official of the Washington-based lender said on Monday. Coming to Kenya, I can confirm that 2 KDF, Kenya Defence Forces soldiers, died today after they were ambushed by suspected Al-Shabaab rebels at Hindi in Lamu. They were attacked by a group of around 10 people who were heavily armed. Most of the soldiers were caught unaware. The convoy had been ferrying supplies to Somalia. And I think this is what I was speaking about. That's Lamu out of the game, I think, from a tourism point of view. That's why I wrote that piece. The dashboard is blinking amber. That was in May this month. I wrote about how the Swahili coast is a potential tinderbox from Lamu through Zanzibar and all points in between. That was September 2012. I put up a photograph of the setting sun in Lamu. More than 600,000 Kenyans are directly employed in the tourism sector, which provides 12.5% of the country's GDP, and it's largely on its knees. Equity Bank set up its mobile service and said it's going to be launched in July, and this has created a lot of excitement and propelled the share price 30.89% higher this year, most of that return coming since they made that announcement. Kenya shilling last trading at 87.899. I'll put up a chart that Money Academy KE sent me. A report yesterday on Reuters says they hit all the banks with quite large amounts as the central bank was on the sell side trying to hold the currency below 88. And I said in that piece I wrote over the weekend, on balance and subject to security issues staying on the trend line, which is obviously considerably elevated in 2014, then the shilling should improve from here. I said the same thing to Bloomberg. I said it will remain below 88 as long as there is no increase in militant attacks, and that people are looking forward to an inflow of dollars from the Eurobond. The Nairobi All shares up 9.3377% this year, has corrected 2.13% since setting an all-time high on the 12th of May. The NSE 20 is down 0.549% this year and closed below the 4,900 level for the first time since April 10. I'll leave you with this from Macharia Gaito. Across parts of central Kenya and the Rift Valley, the Jubilee strongholds, ignorant villagers are being primed to believe that all those bombings blamed on Al-Shabaab are actually part of the same plot to shake the Uhuru Ruto regime. This is scary stuff. Kenyan firm gets license for charter flights to China. This is the company associated with Eric Prince. And then finally, the stock market traded down yesterday to close 0.26% lower at 149.41. Big trade went through in Scan Group, which traded 5.389 million shares and closed slightly higher. The CFC Stanbic was well traded. But you know what's interesting this year has been the outperformance of the small cap sector at the NSE, something we haven't seen for quite a while. Once again, I thank you for listening. I've got to take a leave now because I'm off tomorrow morning early to Maputo, and I'm looking forward to that. Once again, thank you.